Chapter 4: Drugs, Dealing, Robbing, and Rebellion. Renee started to drink alcohol when he was 13, breaking into a pantry cupboard where his dad kept the liquor. He and Johnny Macias, a school buddy who lived in the next track over, poured a combination of Johnny Walker Red, Bacardi rum, and Kahlua into a glass and chugged it down. By then, Renee had already been smoking marijuana for a year. A neighborhood character, Becky, 5 years older, was the famous local head who introduced him to weed. Her parents were old hippies who always placed a big peace sign and blue Christmas lights on the roof of their house during the holidays. She was a tall, blue-eyed blonde hippie chick who wore cut-off Levi's and a vest, marijuana patches on her shirt, and biker chains looped from her waist to her wallet. He was walking by her house when he heard this feminine voice ask, "Hey, you want to smoke?" She had cheap grass, Renee decided. Yeah, that's cool. So they went out to this empty field where there was a big hole in the ground and lit up. He got loaded, hung out for a while with Becky, then threw up. Honestly, he didn't much like that first experience with marijuana, but after that, he smoked it on almost a daily basis. So did most of his homeboys. Older gang members would insist that they didn't force the younger ones to imbibe or toke up, that it was 12 Older gang members would insist that they didn't force the younger ones to imbibe or toke up, that it was a 12 or 13-year-old choice. But to a kid trying to fit in, trying to impress his older, cooler peers, he did it. The Arta homeboys, like so many other gangsters, washed their hands of responsibility for the younger ones. And Renee was just past puberty, had already slipped into a pattern of substance abuse that arguably helped shape who he would become. His second brush with the law wasn't any more spectacular than his first arrest for stealing fireworks from a neighborhood's house. His second brush with the law wasn't any more spectacular than the first for stealing fireworks from a neighbor's house. He and two 13-year-old friends ditched school and were headed to the house of a girl who had promised them sex. They had already shared some heavy petting, but she was going to go all the way this time. As the three anxious junior high school lovers headed down the street, Renee noticed a yard where a new sprinkler system was being installed. He couldn't resist kicking over some of the elevated sprinkler heads just for the hell of it. A neighbor saw him do it and called the police. Renee didn't make it to the end of the block before he was arrested for malicious mischief, counseled and released. The Enrique's house, one of only a relatively small number in Cerritos, lived in by a minority family, became a meeting point for the gang members. They all lived in nearby Artesia, but the garage at the Enrique's house became a safe place where they go and get high. It became part of Arta's turf. It didn't take rival gangsters from Hawaiian Gardens long to figure that out, and twice they came by shooting up the front of the house. The phrase drive-by hadn't been coined yet. They called it going capping. Just pick an enemy gangster, drive by his house and shoot. Arta always retaliated. Mark, 3 years older than Renee, also got into a problem with a local drug dealer. He owed the dealer quite a bit of money that he didn't have. This guy was no punk and he was going to make Mark pay one way or the other. Mark took the problem to his father, who reacted angrily. "This is wrong, son." John wanted to call the police, but Mark and Renee, creatures of a street code that said no cops, begged him not to do it. Their father eventually relented, agreed to pay off the drug dealer himself, and admonished his sons to never get involved with this guy again. 13-year-old Renee hid in the bathroom with his dad's hunting rifle when the drug dealer showed up to collect. He was ready to shoot him if something went wrong. Afterward, the brothers ignored their father's pleas to stay away from the drug scene. He whooped them a few times when they came home high, but they fended off the blows and went on with their druggy gangster lifestyle. In fact, Renee became a regular user of PCP when he was only 14. Not only did he use it, he made it and sold it too. He bought mint leaf by the ounce and kukui dust at the local Safeway supermarket, mixed it up at home, put it on dry ice, and let it crystallize. He sold it to other school kids and had a lucrative little business for an 8th grader. PCP is a drug that gives you a stuttering, stupid euphoria. It clearly had an effect on Renee. He would often wake up in a drug-induced daze. He had no idea where he'd been or what he'd done. It was another great ingredient for self-destructive behavior, and it improved his chances of ending up behind bars. John Macias was a gang member from the Compton Barrio Largo who moved into a tract housing complex next to where the Enrique's family lived in Cerritos. He was the only other Mexican-American kid in the immediate area who was Renee's age. The two of them met at school, started drinking together, and became partners in crime, breaking into local homes. Whatever they stole, they would sell on the street or trade for drugs. Johnny's next-door neighbors left for vacation, and this high school freshman burglary team broke into their house as soon as they left. It was 1976, right before Thanksgiving. Inside, they found a stash of guns, including a .22 caliber pistol, a .38 special, and a .410, 22 over-under shotgun. In the garage was an Oldsmobile 98. They got the keys and stole that too. Two skinny little 14-year-olds without a driver's license between them were rocking back and forth down the street in this big old boat of a stolen car with holsters and guns strapped to their bodies. They did donuts on the grass in front of Cerritos High School and drove all over town, making sure all their homeboys and homegirls got a good look at them in their entire cholo splendor. Then Renee decided to get revenge against the Hawaiian Garden gang members for shooting up his house earlier. It was broad daylight. Johnny was at the wheel as they drove up to a little corrugated metal shack that served as a team post and saw two rival gangsters about their age. Boxer was seated on the window ledge, hanging over the top of the car roof with his .38. He shouted, "Where you from?" He locked eyes with one kid who knew what was about to happen, turned, and took off with his homie. Boxer fired wildly as the two enemies scurried over a nearby fence and escaped, shaken but unharmed. A police report would later confirm that more than a few of the bullets went into the roof of the Oldsmobile. Renee was a kid with a gun, no Dirty Harry. Next, they drove to an enemy household, saw groups standing out front, and repeated the same drill. They later heard that a girl was hit in the wrist, and Renee thought he winged a couple of cholos, but never knew for sure. Then they drove on to Orange County, robbed $20 from a gas station attendant, dumped the stolen car in an industrial park, and walked home. Renee kept the guns, a bunch of them, and laid them out on his bed to show his little brother John. That's when his father walked into the room. He called to his wife, "Call the police, he's got guns." The cops were there within minutes. Renee never moved. My father held me there with his stare. Mr. Enrique thought it would be good for his wayward son to spend a night in jail. Renee remembered his dad telling the police, "Take him overnight and scare him." He was sure it was the right thing to do. Sheriff's deputies took Renee to the Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall, 10 miles away in Downey. It was scary. 400 juvenile delinquents housed together on a 26-acre site built in 1957 at Los Angeles County's Second Reform School. There was constant tension and confrontation between different races and gangs. Renee had more than one fist fight with gang members from other neighborhoods. It was an alien place, especially for a kid who had never even been away from home by himself. And it wasn't for just one night. He was there for 7 weeks, awaiting trial. His parents dutifully visited him every weekend and hired a lawyer to defend him in juvenile court. There are no jury trials in the juvenile justice system, just a hearing before a judge, who has the ultimate power to decide what's best for the defendant. His parents were as shocked as Renee when the judge made him a ward of the state and sent him to the Boys Republic in Chino Hills, a sprawling 2-acre self-contained farm and school campus 20 miles northeast of Cerritos. The wards lived in 25 separate cottages, but it was a reform school that offered multidisciplinary treatment for teenagers in need of highly structured supervision. He was confined there for 7 months, but was allowed to spend weekends at home with his parents. He hated it. Renee couldn't understand why his dad had called the police in the first place. "I thought my father betrayed me." He resented his father because of it. On the other hand, John Enriquez didn't understand why his son felt that way. He came from another world, deep in Mexico, where a father's word was law. His son didn't respect that, or the simple truth that his father had only been trying to do what he thought was right. The bitterness and distance between them grew. Renee explained, every argument we ever had after that, I brought up what I perceived as my dad's betrayal. In the end, reform school only furthered Renee's gang education. I was baptized in jail, my first twist, and it handled